The village of Durandpur was a place where every life seemed to be on display.
Will
Homes
you
were
marry
built
me
close together,
instead of leaving?
gossip traveled faster than the wind, and people carried opinions the way farmers carried baskets, always full, always ready to spill. Within this tight-knit, ever-watchful world lived Mira, a girl whose name was known by everyone but respected by almost no one. From the time Mira was old enough to understand words, she also began understanding cruelty. She had been born heavier than most children, and as she grew, her body grew in ways that villagers, steeped in tradition and expectation, did not approve of. The women whispered that she was far too fat to ever dance in the spring festival, and the men snickered that no sensible boy would ever choose her as a bride. Even Myra's own relatives spoke of her in hushed tones, as if her weight were a shameful secret rather than a simple fact of her life. Mira's parents, though they loved her in their own way, allowed the pressure of the village to shape their decisions. Her mother would often scold her, not out of genuine anger, but out of fear of what the neighbors would say, fear of being blamed for raising an unpresentable daughter. Whenever they had to appear in public, her mother held out a rough brown sack, the kind farmers used to store grain. "Cover your face," she would say in a voice laden with embarrassment. "It's better this way. People won't stare as much." And so Mira obeyed. She would slip the sack over her head, leaving only two small slits for her eyes to see through. What started as a temporary measure became a permanent habit. With time, she stopped questioning it. If she walked past the marketplace without it, she could hear snickers behind her back. If she dared meet someone's eyes, she would hear muttered words, ugly, oversized, disgrace. The sack became her shield against a world that refused to see anything beautiful in her. Despite this, Mira had a heart that felt deeply. She noticed beauty in places others ignored. The way sunlight broke through the banyan branches, the way dust danced in the wind, the way music from distant festivities carried warmth even across cold, empty spaces. But the beauty she saw around her only intensified the pain inside her. How could the world be so lovely and yet so unkind? The worst moments were during the annual preparations for the spring dance. The entire village transformed into a lively, colorful celebration of music, harvest, and love. Young girls embroidered dresses and practiced dance routines in the temple courtyard. Young men played drums, flutes, and joked about which girl they hoped to dance with. Mira often watched from a distance, her face covered, her heart aching. She memorized the dance steps in secret, her body naturally graceful despite the insults thrown at her. She knew she could dance better than most, but no one would ever let her. "Fat girls don't dance," they would say. People would laugh, and so the spring dance became a symbol of everything Myra was denied: joy, acceptance, possibility. Inside her home, she tried to find comfort in small tasks: grinding spices, sewing clothes, tending to the goat. Her parents offered practical instructions but rarely warmth. They avoided talking about the future, as though Myra's life were a topic too awkward to discuss. No marriage proposals came, and everyone assumed none ever would. Yet beneath all the layers of shame and silence, Mira carried a quiet, stubborn spark, one that no amount of mockery had managed to extinguish. She longed to be seen, truly seen, even if she could not imagine how such a moment would ever come. She did not know that her life, and the village's rigid expectations, would soon be shaken by the arrival of a stranger who would dare to look past the cruelty, and into the person she truly was. Every year, when winter loosened its grip and the first buds appeared on the neem trees, the village of Durandpur would erupt into excitement. The Spring Dance Festival was more than a celebration, it was a declaration of social worth. Couples announced engagements, families showcased their daughter's grace, and the entire community reaffirmed its traditions. To outsiders, the festival appeared festive and charming. To those inside the village, it was also a quiet competition, a hidden judgment parade. The preparations began weeks in advance. Women scrubbed their courtyards, hung marigold garlands on their doors, and dyed their dupattas in bright hues: turmeric yellow, pomegranate red, indigo blue. In the evenings, the temple courtyard echoed with bells, laughter, and the rhythmic stamping of feet as young girls practiced their dance steps under the watchful eye of older women who once danced in their youth. Mira, covered in her plain sack, passed by these scenes like a ghost no one wished to acknowledge. From behind the weave of the fabric, she could see girls her age, slender, confident, radiant, moving in graceful circles. Their bangles chimed, their skirts twirled, and their laughter felt like tiny cuts against her heart. She had wanted to dance since she was a child. Every note of music called to her, made her fingers twitch and her feet itch to move. But in Dharampur, dance was not just art. It was proof of beauty. A girl who danced well was considered desirable. A girl who was not allowed to dance was silently declared unworthy. For Mira, the festival marked the sharpest reminder of what she had been denied. Every year, her mother would warn her days before the festival began. "Do not go near the courtyard, Mira. People will talk. They'll mock us. Stay home. Help me with the chores." And Mira would nod, though her heart tightened each time. Inside their home, the sounds of festivity drifted through the thin mud brick walls. The beats of the tabla thudded in her chest like a pulse she was forbidden to follow. Sometimes she pressed her ear against the wall, imagining herself among the dancers, her feet moving freely, her arms sweeping through the air, her face uncovered, unmocked. But imagination was all she had. When she ventured outside to fetch water or firewood, little girls giggled as she passed. "Look, the sack is walking," one would whisper. Teenagers smirked. A few adults pretended not to see her at all, as if ignoring her erased their discomfort. Yet, every year, she still watched the preparations, from alleys, from corners, from behind market stalls. Not because she wished to torture herself, but because some part of her refused to let the dream die. When the dancers practiced, she secretly mirrored their moves with her fingers. When musicians rehearsed in the open square, she tapped her feet beneath her long skirt, hidden from view. No one knew that Mira had memorized every step of the spring dance, the spins, the hops, the sweeping arm gestures. No one knew that she practiced late at night in the privacy of her room, turning in soft circles when the moonlight pooled on the floor. Her body, so often condemned, felt light and alive when she danced. For those few stolen moments, she was not too fat, not too ugly, not unsuitable. She was simply human. She was simply Mira, but the festival remained a gate she could never pass through. The saddest part wasn't to the exclusion. It was the certainty everyone seemed to have that she did not deserve to belong, that she shouldn't even want to. So when the day of the spring dance finally arrived, the square decorated with lanterns, musicians setting, the tempo couple stepping forward, Myra remained at home sitting quietly by the small window, listening to the music that belonged to everyone except her. What she didn't know was that this year, something different was already in motion. A stranger had arrived in the village, someone with no patience for cruel traditions and no intention of leaving Mira unseen. Dharampur rarely saw strangers. Travelers usually passed through quickly, stopping only long enough to drink water from the communal well or buy dried figs before moving on. The villagers liked it that way. Nothing disrupted their routines. No unfamiliar eyes questioned their traditions. So when a stranger arrived one late afternoon, leading a dust-covered horse and carrying a worn satchel, the entire village shifted just enough to notice. His name was Aaron, though no one knew that at first. The only thing certain was that he wasn't from around there. His clothing was simple but foreign, his boots sturdy, his posture straight like someone used to long journeys. He had the calm air of a man who had seen both hardship and beauty and carried neither with arrogance. The children were the first to swarm him. "Are you lost?" they asked, tugging at his sleeve. Where are you from? Are you a merchant? Do you have sweets?" Aaron laughed softly, a sound that made the elders glance up from their porches. "Just passing through," he replied. "I'm looking for shelter for a few days. And maybe a place to rest my horse." The villagers exchanged looks, curiosity mixed with caution. The headman eventually stepped forward, offering polite hospitality. Strangers, after all, brought stories, and stories were a rare spice in a predictable place like Durandpur. Aaron was directed to an old storage hut the village kept for wanderers. It wasn't much, but he accepted with gratitude. He spent the evening settling in, brushing his horse, and observing the village's slow shift toward dusk. Lanterns flickered on, and the faint notes of music from the spring dance rehearsals floated through the air. That was when he first saw her. At the edge of the market, moving with practiced caution, walked a girl with a brown sack over her head. She wore plain clothes, and her posture carried the heaviness of someone trying to shrink into herself. Children paused their games to whisper. A pair of women gave her a pitying look before returning to their spices. Mira moved silently, almost invisibly, yet Aaron couldn't look away. It wasn't the sack that caught his attention, it was the way she walked. There was a softness to her steps, a rhythm in her movements, as if her body carried music inside it even while the world muted her. Her hands, holding a basket of lentils, moved with quiet precision, like someone who had learned to carry her life cautiously, piece by piece. Aaron didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But he sensed, in an instant, the presence of a burden far heavier than the sack she wore. Later that evening, as he sat outside the hut polishing his flute, a wooden instrument he always carried on his travels, he heard the distant laughter of villagers describing Mira in unkind whispers. "She's the one with the sack," one man snorted. "Ugly as night," another added. "Her parents keep her covered so no one has to see her face," a woman muttered. Aaron frowned. Their cruelty felt too casual, too rehearsed. What kind of place treated someone like that? He didn't ask questions, not yet. Instead, he let their words sit in his mind, quiet and unsettling. The next morning, he wandered through the village square. Women were sweeping the lanes, shopkeepers arranging their goods, children chasing chickens. And there she was again, Mira walking toward the well, her sack tied neatly under her chin. This time, Aaron saw something he hadn't seen before, a brief, nearly imperceptible pause before she reached the well, like a breath she had to take before stepping into public view. He recognized that pause. He had seen it in refugees, in widows, in those who had carried shame that didn't belong to them. Something inside him tightened. He didn't know the girl's story. But he knew one thing with complete certainty. The village was wrong about her. And whether fate intended it or not, he would soon discover just how deeply wrong they were. For the first 2 days of his stay, Aaron observed Mira only from afar. He didn't mean to stare, but there was something undeniably magnetic about her, something in the way she moved with careful intention, as if she'd spent her whole life trying not to disturb anyone around her. Her presence was quiet, yet meaningful, like a soft melody hidden beneath louder instruments. But the moment that brought them face to face happened unexpectedly. It was late afternoon, the sun slanting low over the rooftops, when Mira stepped out of her home carrying 2 large metal pots. She always chose this hour to collect water when the crowd at the well was smaller and the shadows were long enough to hide in. But that day, she didn't realize Aaron was there too, tying his horse to a post nearby. Mira kept her eyes to the ground, as she always did. The sack covered most of her peripheral vision, narrowing the world into a tunnel of blurred colors and shapes. She walked slowly, carefully, balancing the pots against her hip. As she rounded the corner toward the well, a playful goat darted past her, chased by 2 laughing children. Startled, Mira stumbled forward and one of the heavy pots slipped from her fingers. Before it could hit the ground, a hand shot out and caught it with surprising speed. "Careful, these look heavy." Mira froze. Aaron had stepped in front of her, holding the pot easily with one hand. For a moment, neither spoke. The world seemed to narrow, not because of her sack, but because her heart was hammering so loudly she could barely hear anything else. She quickly reached for the pot, her hands trembling. "Sorry," she mumbled, her voice muffled behind the sack. "You don't need to apologize." His tone was warm, gentle. He set the pot upright, making sure she had a firm grip before releasing it. Anyone would have dropped it. Mira shook her head slightly. "No, I should have seen. I should have been more careful." Her words were shaky, almost fearful, as if expecting mockery to follow. Aaron studied her posture, the slight hunch of her shoulders, the way she tried to turn away without being rude. She was ready to retreat, to disappear. Then it happened. A soft breeze swept through the square, catching the edge of her sack. Before Mira could grab it, the fabric lifted just enough to reveal a sliver of her face, her cheek, the curve of her jaw, and most importantly, her eyes. Aaron caught the brief glimpse, unintentional but unmistakably striking. Her eyes were beautiful. Not in the way people describe jewels or oceans, but beautiful with depth, filled with stories, hurt, curiosity, and something he couldn't name yet. They were the eyes of someone who had endured far more than anyone should and survived anyway. Startled, Mira yanked the sack back down, pulling it tight with shaking fingers. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, stepping backward as if she'd committed some terrible mistake. She turned away, ready to flee. "Wait," Aaron said softly. She paused only because his tone didn't carry ridicule. It carried concern, sincere and unexpected. "You don't need to hide from me," he said gently. Myra's breath caught. No one had spoken to her like that. Not ever. She didn't answer, not because she was rude, but because she didn't know how to. Instead, she turned away and hurried to the well, keeping her head low. Aaron watched her go, an uneasy feeling settling in his chest. Something was deeply wrong in this village if a girl reacted to kindness like it was danger. He didn't know her story, but he wanted to. Not out of curiosity, but because, in those fleeting seconds when the sack lifted, he had seen the truth. She wasn't ugly. She was wounded. And wounds, he believed, deserved compassion, not scorn. He didn't yet realize that this small moment, a dropped pot, a gust of wind, a glimpse of her eyes, was the first thread in a powerful bond neither of them could have foreseen. In the days following their brief encounter, Mira tried her best to avoid the area where she had bumped into Aaron. Every time she replayed the moment in her mind, the sack lifting, her eyes meeting his, the gentle warmth in his voice, her stomach twisted with fear. Not fear of him, but fear of what the villagers would say if they saw her speaking to a stranger, especially a man. Yet Aaron noticed her everywhere. Not deliberately, she was simply a presence impossible for him to ignore. He saw how she moved around people like a shadow, slipping through markets and alleys unnoticed unless someone wanted to mock her. He noticed how she flinched at loud voices, how she kept her steps hushed, how she always looked like she was shrinking into the sack's rough fabric. And he noticed something else. Beneath the layers of shame she carried, there was a quiet grace she didn't even know she possessed. Soon after settling in, Aaron offered to teach music to the village children. He'd done it in several towns before, sharing songs in exchange for shelter, food, or simply smiles. Music, he believed, had a way of softening even the hardest hearts. Every afternoon, he sat under the neem tree with his flute and a small drum. Children gathered eagerly, clapping in rhythm, trying to mimic the notes he played. Mira would always pass by at this hour, carrying something for her mother: vegetables, grain, bundles of herbs. She never stayed long, she never spoke. But she paused just enough for Aaron to see the way her fingers twitched, as though itching to follow the rhythm. One evening, as the sun melted into orange streaks across the sky, Aaron walked toward the farmer's barns, hoping to find a quiet place to practice. As he approached, he heard soft movement, a rhythmic shuffle, a delicate stomp. Curiosity piqued. He stepped closer and peered through a crack between the wooden planks. His breath caught. Mira was dancing. Not clumsily, not awkwardly, beautifully. Her arms curved like gentle arcs of wind. Her feet moved with a confidence she didn't know how to carry in daylight. The sack still covered her head, but her body spoke with an honesty that transcended everything the villagers told her she wasn't. She knew the dance steps for the spring festival, every turn, every flourish, every shift in tempo. And she wasn't just imitating movements. She was feeling them, pouring emotion into each gesture as though every hidden part of her longed to be free. Aaron didn't interrupt. He couldn't. To stop such beauty felt like a crime. But when she finished the routine, chest rising and falling with the weight of unspoken dreams, the floor creaked beneath his foot. She froze. "Who's there?" she whispered, voice trembling with dread. Aaron stepped into the barn, hands raised in reassurance. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to scare you." Mira backed away. "Please, don't tell anyone. They'll laugh." "They always laugh." Aaron shook his head. "No one deserves to laugh at you." Silence stretched between them, fragile, uncertain. "You dance," he said finally, "like someone who was born for it." Myra stiffened at the compliment. "No one thinks that." "I'm not no one," Aaron replied gently. Her fingers tightened around her skirt. She wanted to believe him, but years of cruelty had woven themselves into her bones. "I only dance here," she whispered, "in the dark, where no one can see." Aaron's voice softened even more. "Sometimes," he said, "the darkness is where people find their real selves. But that doesn't mean the light wasn't made for them, too." Mira didn't reply. She didn't know how. But that night, something small shifted in her. A single thread of doubt in the stories she'd been told her whole life, that she wasn't enough. Aaron had seen her dance, and he hadn't mocked her. He had admired her. Mira avoided Aaron for the next 2 days, not because she feared him, but because his words had shaken her so deeply she didn't know how to exist around him. Every time she remembered the way he watched her dance, not with disgust or mockery, but with genuine awe, her chest tightened with an emotion she did not have a name for. But fate has a way of pushing two paths together once they begin to bend toward each other. On the third evening after their encounter in the barn, dark clouds gathered over Dharampur. The villagers rushed about, pulling clothes from drying lines, securing firewood, shouting instructions as the wind picked up. Mira was bringing in laundry from her courtyard when the first drops fell heavy and cold. Her mother shouted from inside, "Mira, hurry, before the storm breaks." Mira gathered the remaining clothes quickly. But as she turned to go inside, a strong gust of wind tore through the courtyard and ripped the sack from her head. She gasped, not because she feared her mother seeing her, but because the courtyard gate was open, and someone stood just outside it, Aaron. He had been walking past on his way to the communal shelter when the storm drove everyone indoors. The sack flew directly toward him, landing at his feet. For a moment, neither moved. Rain fell harder, drumming against roofs and earth. Mira froze in panic, hands flying to her hair, her face her exposed face. She stumbled backward, searching desperately for the sack. Aaron stepped forward and picked it up. She stiffened. He didn't hand it back immediately. He held it with a strange expression, part sadness, part anger, part understanding. "Myra," he said softly, "why do you hide behind this?" She swallowed hard. Shame surged through her like a tide. "Please give it back," she whispered. "Please." Instead, Aaron stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't need this. You never did." A crack of thunder tore the sky, but it was nothing compared to the tremor inside Mira. "No," she whispered, tears mixing with rain. "You don't understand. I have to wear it. People can't see me. Why? Erin asked. What are you so afraid of? Her voice broke. Them. Erin's brows knit together. The villagers? Their words? She nodded, trembling uncontrollably. If I don't cover my face, they laugh. They whisper. They stare. They say horrible things. They say I'm ugly, too fat, disgusting, they say. I shame my family. Erin felt something twist painfully in his chest. Is that why your parents make you wear this sack? He asked quietly. It's easier, she whispered. For them? For everyone. No one wants to look at me. Erin lowered his gaze to the sack in his hands. The crude fabric was frayed, patched, and worn too familiar, like a second skin she'd been forced to live inside. He looked back up at her, rain streaking down his face. Myra, he said softly, listen to me. What they've done to you, what they made you believe, none of it is the truth. Their cruelty is not your worth. She shook her head, unable to accept it. You've only known me for days. You don't know how ugly I am. You don't know what I look like. I've seen enough, he replied. I've seen your kindness, your strength, the way you move when you dance, the way your eyes light up when you hear music. That is beauty. Her breath caught painfully. No one has ever said that to me, she whispered. Then they were blind, Erin said simply. Myra looked at him, uncertain, frightened, and vulnerable in a way she had never allowed herself to be. Please, she said weakly, don't tell anyone. Don't tell them you saw me. Erin stepped closer, not invading her space, but offering her an anchor in the storm. I won't tell anyone, he promised. But Myra. He extended the sack toward her, not as acceptance of her fear, but out of respect for her choice. One day, I hope you choose not to wear this. Not because of them, but for yourself. Thunder rolled again, but this time, Myra felt something else inside her, a tiny spark of warmth, flickering despite the storm. For the first time in her life, someone had seen her. And not recoiled, not pitied, not mocked. Someone had wanted to understand her. And that changed everything. The days passed with a strange new rhythm. Myra's life, once measured in chores, whispered insults, and careful avoidance, began to stretch into unexpected territory. With Erin's encouragement, she started practicing her dancing in secret, not in the barn this time, but in a small clearing behind the village where the shadows of the trees hid her from prying eyes. Each step, each spin, each sway of her body was a tiny act of rebellion, a quiet defiance against the years of ridicule and shame. At first, she moved hesitantly. Every motion reminded her of the taunts, too fat to dance, too ugly to wed. Her knees shook, her arms felt awkward, and she stumbled more than once. But Erin's words from the barn echoed in her mind. Sometimes the darkness is where people find their real selves. But that doesn't mean the light wasn't made for you too. These words became her secret mantra. When the villagers were asleep, Myra shed the heavy sack, letting her hair fall freely over her shoulders, and felt the cool night air brush against her skin. The world felt different at night, softer, quieter, more forgiving. In the dark, she could experiment, falter, and rise again without fear. She could dance without judgment. Erin visited these secret rehearsals, though always from a distance at first. He would sit on a log, quietly observing her movements, offering gentle guidance only when she asked. He taught her how to shift her weight, how to make her spins fluid, and how to move in time with the invisible rhythm of her heart. Slowly her confidence grew. Her steps became more certain, her turns smoother, her arms more expressive. Her body, which the village had always dismissed, was discovering its own grace. More importantly, Myra began to believe in herself. The villagers' cruel labels, ugly, fat, unworthy, started to lose their power. Each night, as she danced in the shadows, she felt a spark of freedom, a tiny rebellion against the life she had been forced to accept. She realized that the sack had never protected her. It had only protected the village from confronting their own cruelty. Without it, she was discovering a version of herself that had always existed, hidden beneath layers of fear and shame. One evening, after a particular long session of practice, Mira and Aaron sat under the large banyan tree, catching their breath. The night was alive with the chirping of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves. Aaron looked at her with a mixture of admiration and gentle concern. "You've come so far," he said. "I can see the real Mira now, not the one they've told you to be, but you. The one who dances because her heart wants to." Mira smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that when they see me, they'll laugh. Afraid that I'll never be enough." Aaron shook his head. "They've been wrong for years. Their laughter doesn't define you. Your courage does. The moment you decide to show them who you truly are, that is the moment you take your power back." Mira considered his words. For the first time, she imagined herself dancing not in secret, but in the light of day, in front of everyone. The idea both terrified and exhilarated her. She realized that the act of dancing, of simply existing without fear, was her quiet rebellion against a world that had tried to diminish her. Night after night, she continued to practice, her movements growing bolder, her confidence rising. And each time, Aaron was there watching, guiding, encouraging. Slowly, the thought of participating in the spring dance began to take root in her mind. A seed of possibility that had been dormant for years was now awakening, nurtured by trust, patience, and the first real connection she had ever known. Mira was no longer just surviving, she was beginning to live. And in that small clearing, beneath the canopy of stars, she discovered that rebellion could be quiet, beautiful, and transformative. The girl who had once hidden behind a sack was learning to claim her own space, and her own power one graceful step at a time. The village square was alive with celebration, the air thick with excitement and the scent of incense and roasting spices. Lanterns hung from every available post, flickering in the gentle evening breeze. Music rang from drums, flutes, and stringed instruments as villagers danced, laughed, and celebrated the turning of the season. Tonight was the spring dance, the night when couples traditionally announced engagements and the young women of the village displayed their grace and beauty. Mira approached the square with her usual caution, her heart hammering in her chest. The sack covered her face, hiding the flush of nervous anticipation that burned her cheeks. Her basket clutched tightly in her hands, she moved toward the outskirts of the dance area, hoping to remain unnoticed. But tonight, something inside her stirred, a mix of fear and hope she had never felt before. Weeks of secret practice, encouraged by Aaron, had taught her more than dance steps. They had taught her courage. The villagers noticed her immediately. A few children whispered, pointing. Women snickered behind their hands. Men muttered under their breath. "The girl with the sack," one woman hissed. "Does she even belong here?" But Mira ignored them. Tonight, the music didn't frighten her, it called to her, beckoned her to a place she had only dared to dream of. She knew every note of the traditional tune by heart, every beat that would guide the spins and sways of the dancers. For the first time, she didn't hesitate. She felt the rhythm in her chest, in her feet, in her very bones. Aaron, stationed at the edge of the square, noticed her instantly. He had been waiting, unsure whether to step forward or allow her to decide when she was ready. Now he knew something had changed in her. He saw the spark in her posture, the subtle lift of her chin despite the sack, and he realized that the girl who had once hidden in shadows was preparing to step into the light. He walked toward her, gently, deliberately, through the crowd that had begun to murmur at their proximity. Mira's breath quickened. Every eye seemed to fall upon her, and every whispered judgment threatened to overwhelm her. Yet Aaron's calm presence steadied her, his hand outstretched like an anchor in the sea of eyes. "Will you dance with me?" he asked quietly, just for her, his gaze meeting hers through the narrow slits in the sack. Mira's fingers trembled as she placed her hand in his. A hush seemed to fall over her world. The drums picked up their rhythm, and she allowed herself to move not clumsily, not timidly, but with the grace and confidence she had discovered in her secret rehearsals. At first, her steps were small, cautious, tentative. But as Aaron guided her, his hands steady and reassuring, she began to sway, to spin, to glide. The sack shook with each movement, revealing glimpses of her face to the villagers, and whispers spread like wildfire. Could it be? No one could deny the beauty in her motion. Her arms curved naturally, her feet found the rhythm without thought, and the intensity in her eyes, the eyes Aaron had first glimpsed in the barn, spoke of strength, defiance, and joy. The crowd grew silent, captivated by the girl who had been labeled too fat to dance. For Mira, the moment was transformative. Every insult, every mocking glance from the past seemed to dissolve with each step. She realized that the sack, once a symbol of shame, no longer defined her. She was dancing not to please the villagers, not to prove anything to them, but because she had finally claimed herself. Aaron's smile was steady, warm, unwavering, giving her permission to continue. Step by step, spin by spin, Mira found herself moving in a way she had never imagined. Free, radiant, alive. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a promise, a recognition, a shared understanding that this dance was only the beginning of a story that neither the village nor their past could control. The music swelled, the lanterns flickered, and the village square seemed suspended in time. Mira moved in the center of the crowd, her steps fluid and assured, the rhythm of the drums beating in sync with her heart. Every eye in Dharampur was on her, the girl they had mocked, the one they had deemed unworthy of dance or attention. Yet no one spoke because what they saw was impossible to dismiss. The sack over her head, once a symbol of shame, was now a trembling veil over a revelation waiting to emerge. Mira's movements grew bolder with each step, her spins more confident, her arms lifted as if reaching for freedom itself. The villagers' whispers shifted from scorn to curiosity, from mockery to disbelief. Some muttered, She can actually dance? Others could only stare, paralyzed by the beauty and emotion in her performance. Aaron stepped closer, moving through the crowd with steady purpose. He had guided her here, not to display her, but to remind her of her strength. And now, as her dance reached its crescendo, he knew the final act of courage had to come. He reached out and gently, with no rush and no force, lifted the sack from Mira's head. The crowd gasped. For a moment, silence reigned. Mira's face, fully revealed, was unlike anything they expected. She was not grotesque, not shameful, not unworthy. She was radiant. Her features, framed by long, flowing hair damp with sweat, and the light drizzle that had begun to fall, held a natural beauty that spoke of kindness, resilience, and strength. Her eyes, the same ones Aaron had first glimpsed in the barn, shone with a mixture of vulnerability and triumph. The villagers were speechless. Those who had mocked her, laughed at her, or whispered cruelly behind her back were now forced to confront the reality they had denied for so long. Mira did not shrink. She did not cover her face again. She continued to dance, spinning and twirling with grace that seemed to radiate from the very core of her being. A few brave voices whispered apologies under their breath. Some simply stared, unable to speak. The women who had once mocked her were frozen, while the men, who had dismissed her, shifted uneasily in place. The judgmental eyes that had once crushed her spirit now had no choice but to witness her truth. Aaron extended his hand, and Mira reached for it. Step by step, he guided her through the final movements, her confidence growing with each motion. The dance was no longer just a performance, it was a declaration. a proclamation that she had existed in spite of cruelty, that she had survived, and that she would no longer allow the village's narrow standards to define her worth. As the last notes of the music faded, Mira came to a halt in the center of the square, her chest heaving, sweat and rain mingling on her skin. She looked out at the villagers, not with fear, but with a quiet, unyielding pride. Every harsh word, every insult, every mocking glance from her past had been transformed into something powerful: resilience. Aaron knelt in front of her, holding her gaze. "You've always been worthy," he said, his voice steady and full of warmth. "Not because of anyone's approval, but because of who you are." Mira's lips curved into a small, tentative smile, a smile that carried the weight of years of rejection and the lightness of freedom finally reclaimed. She realized in that moment that the sack had served its purpose only in hiding her from a cruel world. Now, with it gone, she was free to embrace herself fully, and nothing, neither mockery nor doubt, could take that away. The villagers slowly began to clap, hesitantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm, as the enormity of her courage sank in. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Some nodded in respect. Mira had not only revealed her beauty, but she had also challenged the village's narrow definitions of worth, forcing them to confront the injustice of their own prejudices. And in the center of it all, with the lanterns flickering and music fading into the night, Mira finally felt what it meant to be seen, not as too fat or too ugly, but as herself, radiant, courageous, and unstoppable. The music had faded. The lanterns hung like stars frozen in time, casting a warm glow over the stunned village square. Mira stood at the center, her chest still heaving from the dance that had finally unshackled her from years of shame. The sack was gone, her hair fell freely over her shoulders, and her eyes sparkled with courage and defiance. For the first time in her life, she felt seen not as too fat to dance or too ugly to wed, but as herself. The villagers were silent, processing the impossible. The girl they had scorned, dismissed, and hidden away was not only beautiful, she was radiant with confidence. Some shifted uncomfortably, guilt gnawing at their consciences. Others whispered apologies they hadn't dared voice before, but Mira barely noticed. Her world had narrowed to one figure standing before her, Aaron. He stepped forward, calm, deliberate, his eyes holding hers with unwavering certainty. Around them, the crowd seemed to fade into soft shadows, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of quiet intensity. Aaron reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring. There was no pomp, no expectation, just a promise. "Mira," he said, his voice steady and tender, "I have watched you, not as the village sees you, but as you truly are. I have seen your strength, your grace, and your courage. I do not ask for you to change, to conform, or to be anything other than yourself. Will you marry me?" Myra's breath caught. The words, simple as they were, carried a weight she had never imagined. She had spent her life believing she was unworthy, believing she would never be chosen, never loved for herself. Yet here he was, offering her a future built not on appearances, but on truth. Tears blurred her vision as she nodded, unable to find her voice at first. Then, finally, she whispered, "Yes." A wave of silence swept over the square. Slowly, the villagers began to realize the significance of the moment. This was not merely a proposal, it was a challenge to every shallow judgment they had ever made. It was a lesson in seeing beyond appearances, in valuing the heart over the body. Their laughter, whispers, and cruelty had been exposed as ignorance, and they could not ignore the truth Mira now embodied. Aaron slipped the ring onto her finger, and for a brief moment, the village held its collective breath. Mira smiled, radiant and unafraid, her eyes shining with the joy of someone finally acknowledged, finally loved. For the first time, she did not shrink from the gaze of the world. She embraced it. The elders, Once the harshest critics stepped forward hesitantly, nodding their respect. The younger villagers, inspired by Mira's bravery, began to clap, then cheer, their admiration breaking the ice of years-long prejudice. One by one, they celebrated not only her courage but the lesson she had taught them, that worth cannot be measured by size, beauty, or conformity. Aaron took her hand, guiding her to the center of the square. Together, they faced the villagers, not with arrogance, but with quiet triumph. Mira's dance had ended hours ago, yet the rhythm of her newfound freedom still pulsed through her veins. Now, it was not just the dance that defined her, it was her choice to step into the light, to claim herself, and to accept love without shame. That night, Mira became more than a bride or a dancer. She became a symbol of courage, of self-acceptance, of the power to rewrite one's story in the face of ridicule. And with Aaron by her side, she knew that the sack, the whispers, and the cruelty of the past no longer had power over her. The village would never forget the night when the girl they had dismissed transformed their understanding of beauty, love, and courage. And Mira, once hidden behind a sack, walked into her future with her head held high, radiant and wholly, unapologetically herself.